Tennessee, David Tulis.
The big question in my mind about the indictment of a sheriff in Georgia after a mass search of 900 students is this. How come the brave young men who are sports stars did not attempt to interfere with the officers who were groping hundreds of girls in that school? Officers who were sexually molesting girls and boys, young men and young women in that school in Worth County, Georgia. This was April the 14th of this year, and Jeff Hobby, the sheriff, has been indicted. There were 6 true bills issued among 36 accusations against the sheriff. And the problem, as seen by the people impaneled in the grand jury, is that the sheriff is guilty of violating the Constitution, and the fault lies in his rejection of God. Now, that is what the jury said in effect, because it pointed to the oath of office that Sheriff Jeff Hobby swore to uphold the Constitution of the United States and of the state of Georgia, and he did that before God. And because he violated his oath to God, he is being indicted. He's been accused, and he is going to stand trial, a criminal trial, for rejecting God and doing what he thought best, right? Following his own gut instincts as a law enforcer in that county. The indictment in the true bill says that he did unlawfully, willfully, and intentionally violate the forms of his oath. You know, I would say it's the substance of the oath that's at issue here, not just the form, but that he did intentionally violate the forms of his oath as prescribed by law, and that he did swear to, quote, support the constitutions of the United States and of this state, and then did order deputies under his employ to search students present at Worth County High School without probable cause or any other legal basis and without due process, in violation of the Constitution of the United States and its amendments and the Constitution of the state of Georgia, contrary to the laws of said state, the good order, peace, and dignity thereof. That is a beautifully crafted single sentence there that is as it should be, all the parts working together, coordinating the claim by the people against the highest law officer in Worth County, the grand jurors aforesaid, on their oaths aforesaid. See, they swear an oath too. To whom? Well, to God. That's why God is important, and no person who reads the headlines should forget that God is important and that oaths matter. Every oath matters. If you're dealing with a police officer, a sheriff's deputy, a sheriff, or a county clerk here, such as Bill Knowles, you have in view God, because when they took that office, when they stepped out of their personal activities and their private lives and their doings in persona propria, right, in their natural persons, they step out of that role and into the public office. They encloak themselves with a new persona, a new duty, a new person, a new claim. They are subject to the law, they're subject to the people, and they are held before God to a higher standard than the common man. That's true for ministers. That's true for ministers of the public weal as well. That's what a sheriff is. He is a minister of the sword, as the scriptures teach. Romans 13, right? He is a minister. And the oath that Sheriff Worthy took before God is one that binds him to a narrow and true path, that path outlined by the law. And it's the same here in Hamilton County. Sheriff Jim Hammond is our sheriff, and he swears to uphold the Tennessee Constitution and the Constitution of the United States with its amendments. Notice how that phrase is part of the true bill issued late Tuesday in Worth County, Georgia. 6 true bills among 36 accusations. Some of the accusations remain on the table. Some were dismissed. And this search. Now, the question is, though, really that I want to bring here to you, my listener, here in Chattanooga, is this. What about your son in the public high school? Okay, your son is a member of the public high school, a student there, and he's on the team. He's a wrestler, let's say. Maybe he's on the basketball team. Or maybe he is at the pinnacle of American high schooldom, and that would be the football team. Basketball is certainly behind football in esteem and value as a social construct, as a kind of a quasi-idol that American people have made out of that frolicsome activity of football. And there your son is, and let's just say your son, given where he is now in Hamilton County, maybe he's in senior, about ready to graduate, and he's on the football team. And let's just say that Sheriff Jim Hammond is mistaken somehow, which he won't be. He's mistaken in the same way that Sheriff Jeff Hobby was mistaken in ordering the search. Well, what is your son going to do? What is he going to say when the officer starts groping the lower parts of the girl next to him on the wall, right? They've all been lined up on the wall, let's just pretend, and hands on the wall. I have your hands up on the wall because you are guilty, right? You're presumed guilty. And the officer is touching the lower parts, the pudendum of the female, right? The buttocks of the female. And then the young man, just on her right, you're on her left, and on her right, there's a young man who was missed. And so the officer goes back and presses the groin of that student. Well, that happened dozens and dozens of times in an aggressive search overseen by an administrator of that school. Now, I'm relying here on the reporting of this upon a TV station in Worth County, Georgia. And the sheriff says, well, what I did was lawful because there was an administrator present. So in other words, if one state actor is present, another state actor may violate the Constitution, right? The state actor who's the sheriff can violate the Constitution if a state actor who is on the school board or hired by the school board, either is a principal capacity or the superintendent capacity, is there to watch. Well, how does that work? How does that work? The question to bring this home, let me just get to it if I can, here on the David Tulis Show at Nooga Radio 92.7 FM and 95.2 FM HD4. What would your son have done? Would your son have said, I'm sorry, ma'am, talking to the female officer, you need to get your hands off that girl. I'm sorry, sir, you need to get your hands out of the crotch of my school chum here a little bit further down on the wall. He's by the lockers. You can't do that. I'm sorry, you've got no probable cause. Where are we going to find a young man who can say that one question? State your probable cause, and do you have a reasonable suspicion that I've committed a crime? Am in the middle of committing a crime? Or do you have a warrant for my arrest? What makes you think that I've done something wrong? That's the question that your high school student son should be asking. And there has been no report of any one of these students, 900 students plus, on that date, April 14th, 2017, that said that. No student got into trouble. No student, no wrestler, no football team member in that school got into trouble by resisting and denying and demanding probable cause. No one did that. Well, why not? Why not? And does it bother you that your son has not been trained to ask that question? He's not going to get trained to ask that question in the civics class. He's not going to get trained to ask that question in the history class, where they skim over the Constitution as bad as it was, as bad as it is. It still has some good things in it, such as the Fourth Amendment, the right to be free of arbitrary search and seizure, and not to be searched without a probable cause or a warrant. Those are protections that he has, and those things are all just skimmed over as just sort of arcana, archival material, parchment-like, crusty, crinkly sounding. If you open it a little bit, it's just crinkly sounding and very old, very old. And we are progressive. Now, we are ahead of these old times. We think in better ways. We think in terms of the economy. We think in terms of the internet. We think in terms of our great nation and its great cause and the exceptional nature of the American way. That's what we think about in history. And that's the propaganda we're taught in the public school history class. Why were there not a brave and courageous and strong team player on the football team in Worth County to say, no, absolutely not. You cannot touch her. You get your hands off of her. But that's a detail. You know, that really For him to have said that would have been a detail. The larger question should have been on the main issue. What is your authority? State your authority. What's your business? And the young man should have turned around and said, I demand to know what your authority is. And he should have just looked at the deputy and said, I demand to know what your authority is. Now, the deputy would have been bluffing in the threats that would fall from his lips and say, kid, you just turn around. This is a search and you're under our control. That kind of thing. That's what he would have said. Now, what brave teenage boy, 17, 18, already a man, right? A man that old has the power of reproduction already for 4 years in his loins. He can be a man. He already is a man, and yet he's been treated as a boy. And he is given the knowledge of a boy, not the knowledge of a man. The knowledge of a man would be to demand authority. That is the question. That is the question for every free person, every person who loves local economy and the free market. That's the question. State your authority. Show me your warrant. Do you have knowledge of any particular person in here who is to be waylaid, stopped, detained, and arrested? Because we are all effectively under arrest. Show your probable cause. There cannot be an arrest without probable cause, period. There is no arrest without probable cause, period. The cop has to have seen you do something. He has to have a warrant for your arrest. And absent that, David Tulis would like to suggest to you, my listener, he is impotent to act. He cannot act. He cannot act, period. It cannot be done. He simply has no authority. And so we have high testosterone men in a high school, probably, let's just say 450. Let's just say half the men, 450 young men in that high school, ranging in age probably from 15 to 18 when they graduate. And not a one, if we are to believe reports, got in trouble. Not a one got in trouble, because they were all under control. They were all under sway. The sway was at the moment. The officers all armed with guns, all armed with tasers, all wearing uniforms, all looking like they represent the law. And they didn't. They weren't representing the law at all. And the grand jury saw it. The grand jury saw that this was a pretense of law. There was no law involved. There was simply no law. These were people impotently acting in their personal capacities to abuse individuals. Now, lawsuits have been filed civilly, but this is a crime. This is a crime that should not be left to the individual to sue over and leave a third of his damages on the table for the attorney to collect. Right? This should be done by the state. This is a crime that the judge should pursue as a crime. It is a crime for any officer to take you, my listener, if he hasn't seen you commit a crime, and detain you, question you, stop you. And we have cases, the authorities for this are State versus Garcia, State versus Raspberry, and there are others. The moment the blue lights come on, you are under arrest, as we have pointed out. And in Chattanooga, we are not properly warned, according to Arizona versus Miranda, of the right to be free of arbitrary searches and seizures. If you're under arrest, Miranda versus Arizona, 1966, requires, and also the same thinking takes place in the earlier Escobedo case. You have to be notified that you're under arrest and that anything you say can and will be used against you. And you need to know that. You need to Mirandize yourself. You, my listener, here in Chattanooga, you need to Mirandize yourself, because that means to say, if you say one thing, you give one thing, you reveal one thing, you admit one thing, you allow one thing, one word, one document, one popping of the trunk lid to let the officer in. You admit or grant any one thing, it can and it will be used against you in court. David Tulis, what does that have to do with local economy and the free market? Well, it does, because it has a lot to do with these things, because if we are unsure of our rights, if we have to wait for the officer to tell us what our rights are, then we are not a free people. And only in freedom, only in liberty, can there be an enriched and prosperous and confident local economy. Look, as a Christian, I know you're not a Christian, but let's just say you know people who are Christians, and let's say you have some sympathy with that system of life and thought. The Christian theory is of progress, right? Of the increase of his government, there shall be no end, as we read in Isaiah. That means that over time, godliness will prevail, and God will prevail over the nations, not just over individuals one by one and thousands by thousands, but over nations and systems and institutions, all of them, everything, universities, hospitals, armies, courts, welfare systems, all are, the promise is, all are becoming more and more gentle, more and more meek, more and more righteous, more equitable, and more just. That's the promise of Christianity. And so I have believing these promises, I have a very positive view of the future. Man's progress has been remarkable, especially since the Lord Jesus. There were major steps at the time of Solomon in man's improvement, his self-improvement, and then also after the resurrection, major improvements, and then again in the 1500s in the Reformation. Always there have been great improvements in mankind's state. We live in the best time ever, even though we are under tyranny right now. It could be much worse, no doubt. It could be much worse. But the Worth County Grand Jury returned 6 indictments, and the complaints are against Jeff Hobby, the sheriff, and 2 deputies. The sheriff said initially, "Well, there's an administrator hereby to make sure it's okay." Well, that is a joke. The superintendent of the county, the interim superintendent, quoted by WALB TV Channel 10, said, "I've never been involved in anything like that in the past 21 years, and I don't condone it." Lawrence Walters said, "We did not give permission," but they didn't ask for permission. He just said, the sheriff, that he was going to do after spring break. And everybody was touched. Everybody was sexually molested in that group. Everybody, backsides, crotches, you name it. Pat down the inside of the leg, down the outside of the leg for drugs, a drug case. Well, the police had searched all these students earlier in a mass search, March 17. No results. There is a narrative offered by the sheriff's department that, well, there'd been some thefts in the area, and, well, we know there are drugs here and there. Well, maybe so. Maybe so. But if you don't have particular information, if you don't have a snitch or someone willing to sign an affidavit under penalty of perjury as an oath for a warrant, then there's nothing you can do. There is simply nothing you can do. Just let the free market play itself out among the students. If there is a little bit of weed, just let it go. There's nothing you can do about it. It's just a weed. It's just a plant, right? It's just a harmless plant. Leave it alone. Leave it alone. Not one gentleman among the brave players said no, and that is the real grievance that I think we should have. That the men did not protect the women. The young ball players did not protect the girls from sexual abuse right in their very presence. Right in their presence, they did nothing. No one turned around and said, "You get your hands off of her." Don't we think there's something wrong with that? Don't we think that that's just a grievous offense? Aren't we hurt by that? Doesn't that bother you? That bothers me. That just really bothers me. And you, my listener, have your son and your daughter in an institution, the public school, that allows that and that teaches that this is the norm. It teaches, the whole public school theory is that you are being served by the state. We have a great state. But in fact, the state is there to serve you. But in fact, the state is the enemy. The state is a false god, and its failings are becoming more and more evident. And I think the reformation of that system has to come from people who have morals. And people who have morals must be and will have to be people who have a law system outside themselves. Christianity proposes to be that system. In fact, it is that system. It is purely, the Christian theory is non-mystical at all. There is no mysticism in it at all. It is purely ethical and judicial. It is a purely ethical and judicial system of worship. You worship God by obeying his laws and avoiding the sins that he describes as violation of that law, right? A violation of that, a sin is anything that is against what God requires in thought, word, or deed. And that's it. You do what God says in love for him and in fear of his wrath. And you don't do what he forbids. That system is the basis of reform. And I think the people who have that system between their ears and some of them in their hearts are God's people in the church. And so my complaint is, and my argument is, that this group has to understand that this Worth County search that is happening here, it's the same thing is happening here, even though it hasn't happened, because Jim Hammond, the sheriff, would never allow it. He would never allow it, ever. He wouldn't allow it. But the idea is that we're being trained to accept it. The men are being trained to accept it and not resist and not intervene and interpose. And the girls are trained to accept it too. Physical abuse, anal. Think of the anal cavities, the cavity searches on the sides of streets by officers using the same glove, checking the tail ends of two women with the same pair of blue gloves. Did you hear about that case? It's just astounding that there's not a revolt. Why is there not a revolt by people like you? Why do you accept that? Why do you accept that? That's what I don't get. I don't get it. And we accept the training of that line of thinking in the public school. The public school, there to serve the families of Hamilton County and Chattanooga. This is David Tulis. I'm wondering about you. I'm wondering about you, my listener. Why have you done nothing? Get out. Get out. Next, the markets.
The Tennessee Valley's news talk leader, Nooga Radio, Digital FM 95.